Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something huge, a paradox that's been at the very heart of the relationship between Judaism and Christianity for 2,000 years. We're going to unpack the explanation our source material gives for a really profound question. So here it is, the big question. This one gets right to the heart of a deep, complicated, and often painful spiritual divide. And to even begin to understand the author's answer, we have to look at just how dramatically things have changed since the very beginning. So the author kicks things off by showing us this stark contrast. In the early days, the Christian message spread like wildfire among the Jewish people. It made sense. They shared the same scriptures, the same hopes for a Messiah. But you fast forward to today, and that widespread acceptance has turned into widespread rejection. So what on earth happened? And to really hammer this home, the author points to this one incredible moment from the book of Acts. The Apostle Peter gives a single sermon, and over 3,000 Jewish men convert on the spot. And get this, the source points out that's just the men. If you count women and children, we could be talking about closer to 15,000 people. This wasn't some foreign religion, it was a movement that exploded from within Judaism itself. Okay, so how do we get from thousands of converts in a single day to a 2,000-year-old divide? Well, here's the roadmap our source material lays out for us. We'll look at that foundational paradox, then dive into some deep historical wounds and core theological differences. After that, we'll explore a modern-day paradox involving prophecy and politics before we get to the author's ultimate spiritual explanation and their final message of salvation. All right, so the first piece of this puzzle, according to the author, isn't actually about beliefs or scripture. No, it's about history. It's about deep, lasting trauma. The argument here is that centuries of violence, all committed in the name of Christ, fundamentally poisoned the well. And we're talking about some truly horrific events here. The source points directly to things like the Crusades and the Holocaust, brutal acts of persecution carried out by people who called themselves Christians. These events didn't just cause incredible pain, they carved a deep, deep chasm of mistrust that has lasted for centuries. So here's the bottom line. According to the author, this wasn't just history. It was a complete breakdown of trust. It meant that the cross, which for Christians is this ultimate symbol of love and salvation, became, for many in the Jewish community, a symbol of persecution, of violence, and of suffering. But history is only part of the story. The author says there's an even deeper reason for this divide, and it goes right to the core of their beliefs. It turns out the two faiths had fundamentally different ideas about who the Messiah was actually supposed to be. You see, the author explains that in traditional Jewish prophecy, the Messiah was expected to be a triumphant king, right? A political leader who would crush Israel's enemies and restore the kingdom. And Jesus? Well, he was the polar opposite of that. He was a suffering servant who was crucified. From that perspective, his death on a cross isn't a holy sacrifice, it's a symbol of failure and defeat. And the resurrection, it's just seen as an impossibility. Okay, so we've got historical wounds and a major disagreement on who the Messiah should be. But the author argues there's a third layer to this paradox, and it's happening right now, in our time. It centers on the modern state of Israel, a nation that the author sees as both a divine miracle and, honestly, a profound spiritual puzzle. Think about this for a second. For 2,000 years, a people are scattered across the globe. Then, in 1948, the nation of Israel is reborn. The author of our source sees this as nothing short of a monumental miracle. It's presented as a direct fulfillment of biblical prophecy, a sign that God's promises hold true. And for the author, this is proof of something unique about the Jewish people, their incredible God-given resilience. They even ask the question, could any other people on Earth maintain their identity and return to their homeland after 2 millennia? From the author's viewpoint, this perseverance is a clear sign of a divine calling. But this is where the author throws a real curveball. Right after celebrating Israel's existence as a miracle, they introduce a really sharp and controversial critique of its modern military actions. And here's a direct quote from the source material. They fire rockets like a video game. There is no humanity in it. So this is the author's central tension. How can this nation, which they see as a miracle from God, then act in a way that feels, completely devoid of that same spirit? And to really put a fine point on this conflict, the author brings up this famous verse. The key part for them is God's love for the world. So the paradox becomes, How can a nation, whose very existence is seen as a fulfillment of God's plan, then take actions that, in the author's eyes, seem to completely contradict the universal love that's supposed to be at the very core of God's character? So you've got the history, the theology, this modern paradox. Faced with all this, the author lands on a final, supernatural explanation for why this huge gap still exists. So, what's the root cause of all this in the author's mind? They call it Satan's trickery. The idea here is that there's a deliberate, cosmic strategy at play. Take the real pain of human history, use it to plant seeds of hatred and unforgiveness, and then build a spiritual wall so high and so thick that it feels impossible for anyone to ever overcome it. And this is precisely why, according to the author, the Christian message is so laser-focused on forgiveness and mercy. They're presented as the antidote, as the only spiritual tools powerful enough to start tearing down that wall and healing the wounds that keep people separated from God. Which brings us to the very end of the author's argument. After walking us through the history, the theology, and the spiritual conflict, they now offer what they see as the one true solution to this entire paradox. And that solution comes down to one word: grace. The author defines it not as something you can earn, not something you get for being a good person, but as a priceless, totally unmerited gift. It's presented as the way justice is finally fulfilled, paid for by the sacrifice of Jesus. But here's the catch, and it's a big one, according to the author. It's all about choice. This gift of grace, they argue, is offered freely to every single person, but it's never forced on anyone. You have to consciously, willingly reach out and accept it. Or, as the source puts it, if you're unwilling, you just won't get this priceless treasure. And so, in the end, this whole exploration of the author's perspective doesn't wrap up with a neat little answer, but with a big question pointed right back at you. After considering all the history, all the arguments, and all the spiritual claims, the source leaves you with this to think about. What would it take to accept a gift like that?